All right, so we are here in another call, a TM Plus call. We've got Michael Ryan here from the Think Movement Group down in SoCal, and our outside participant is David. How do you pronounce your last name?
Zundel.
Zundel, and he will introduce himself for you guys.
My background is mostly in tech. What I do changes, but mostly nowadays I work on Linux servers, enterprise servers. But I also have a very long resume in nonprofits and a lot of practice with teaching people about yoga and bicycles as a teacher, as a manager of teachers, as a manager of bicycle nonprofits, as leader of nonprofits. So I've spent a lot of time looking at how people learn, what motivates them, which is crucial and tricky, and also in my own practice, and also not currently during lockdown am I teaching, but before we had lockdown, I was teaching regularly. And the lockdown will change what I teach.
Yeah, and how? And that's the big question today. Our topic today is physical education. Doing it remote is very different. And again, assumptions, etc. But as we start this conversation, and I'll just try to kick it off, and I'll start with you first. Michael, let's go with what's good about physical education.
So the words physical education, in theory, that's amazing, right? You're getting educated about yourself, what your capabilities are, maybe what you might be afraid of, how to overcome these things in the physical manner. It's very real. There's nothing really theoretical about it when you're out and about moving and playing. You're really doing it, right? Your body's in action. So with that, getting people moving, getting them aware of themselves, seeing what their capabilities are, this is a beautiful thing. So just, yeah, in theory, being educated about yourself, what you can do with your body, I think there is a lot of room there for having some amazing epiphanies, if you will, or realizations about who you are, what you want to do, and how your choices affect what your capabilities are. I think that was really what led me into it. It was like, wow, I can change myself through my actions, you know, the adaptations, whatever I expose myself to, how my environment is, that is going to have a great deal of difference between who I am. So I think that idea is really, really important. And if we show people that self-efficacy from the beginning, like, look, your choices can make a difference in who you are and what you're capable of and where you want to go in this lifetime, I think that's really empowering. So I think physical education is a great avenue to do that. And that can extend to life choices way outside of any physical realm, right? So I think that's the main thing I like about it.
Excellent answer. Dave, your take, and it could be kids or adults, however you want to take it.
The most important part, and I'll look at this from having led a nonprofit that did lots of programs looking at mostly middle-aged and older men, getting them off the couch. And the biggest benefit that was life-changing more often happened between the ears than under the belt, of engagement with other people, finding activities they enjoyed, and this changes psychology. This changes a person, instead of being more passive and being more negative, they find at least these small parts of their life that they turn up for once a week or once a month that are fun, that engage them with people who may not become fast friends and they may not spend any more time with outside of the activity, but they enjoy. They enjoy the action, they enjoy, and they learn something new. We did things like integrate gardening and cooking with yoga and bicycling. So I had a good programmer for an executive director. And it changes what happens in terms of how a person thinks. We use the word wellness very deliberately. It changes how a person thinks about their wellness. And I've done the same thing with kids. With kids, I've taught them bicycle mechanics for things like YMCA summer programs. Small group of kids from a poor part of town. Own, control. We gave them the bike, working for the nonprofit. Here's the bike, but it's not, hopefully, not going to languish in the garage because you can't change a flat, because we're going to teach you how to change a flat. and you're going to have a sense of ownership and control about this little vehicle that gives you a lot of freedom. And you're not waiting for a bus or somebody to give you a ride, and we're giving it to you and your friends all together in your neighborhood, in your middle school or your elementary school, and off you go, but you can fix your own drop chain. You don't have to wait for dad or be left out because you're the kid who busted his.
Right.
That's
I mean,
changing the mind.
What a beautiful metaphor, right? This idea that you literally have this vehicle. And if I answer that same question, I have to start with the fact that it exists. You know, I'm not sure how many states, and this is the United States perspective right now, have PE as a graduation requirement, but in Oregon, where I am, it is. So again, we're going to make this thing happen. So that is a huge thing about physical education, that the fact that it exists. And again, the avenue in which you take it could be anything you want, which carries on to both of your answers, in that the ability to literally do, to figure out how to do and how to improve at something, I think, and something that is important to you, which if I shift gears and say, well, what might not be great about physical education is that most of the times kids do not have the ownership in which you speak of. It is teacher, somewhat militant, somewhat, this is how I'm doing it, this is the time you need to get an A. No questions about like what, why, right? And that, I think, is where the issue is that there is one person governing this thing that is dictating what we should do, how we should do it, and how long we should do it. So I'll just kind of toss that out as the potential shortcoming. Michael, if you want to add on to that, or?
I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head, to be honest, because I'm trying to think about myself and when I went through PE and the shortcomings when I was a student. And what's weird is that we were super active, myself and my peer group, all my friends. We played sports, and we even organized our own little games after school all of the time. Like we would look forward to getting off of the bus to go to like the neighborhood kids' house to get out the football or the basketball or ride our bikes around. But when it came to PE, it was a complete chore. I mean, I remember my PE class was a complete mess. Like no one liked it. We were not good kids. We were not good students at all, but no one was there to really like rein us in. No one asked us, like you said, no questions were asked, right? It was like, dress out, get on your number. Here's what we're going to do today, where it's going to be like either a mile or maybe we'll learn how to play a sport. But like, we already know how to play these sports, right? Just give us the ball and let us go. So I think the big thing was, it was totally like military style, regimented, and we weren't ready for that. We didn't sign up for that in a way. We were just kids who were like, we just play, like we're outside here, like let us go, and like we'll take care of most of it, right? Just make sure we don't hurt ourselves or get in a fight or something, right? And that kind of be the end of it. But it was really, it kind of held us back in a way, and I think it sets the stage for physical activity being something that is a chore and that no one really wants to do. It's kind of like this thing you have to do. We know it's kind of good for our health, but whatever, like I'd rather do other things with my time, right? It's almost as bad as maybe math or English is to some kids, right? The only reason maybe physical education is cool is because you can waste 15 minutes in the locker room, right? And like do whatever, and you can talk with your friends a little bit more, and it's not as like you're in the desk and you know you have to be super quiet. You can maybe get away with a little bit more leeway because you're like have a little bit more mobility about the school, right? But other than that, it wasn't a good class at all. And I don't think I'm trying to think back before this call started. I'm like, what did I learn from PE? And I really can't think of anything that I took away with me that really like I'm still thinking about today. Like, wow, that was like a learning moment for me where I really like walked away with like a different viewpoint of physical education or whatever about myself. So there was a lot of issues there. And I think that's the driving force with why I really want to improve physical education now, because I feel like there's so much room for improvement and we can do so much with that time that could really make a difference in people's lives. And I feel like it's so easy too. It's not like a hard thing to do really. It's kind of like, let's make play again, right? Let's make physical activity fun and useful, and a time where you can get together with people you like and engage in some games. And it doesn't have to always be for an outcome. It doesn't always have to be a competitive sport, and things like this. And building that repertoire from an early age, I think could really build the entire population on a greater foundation of health. And that would uplift all of society, I feel like, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, you know, you're built on your past experiences. So again, if this is something I liked, and we'll get to this, I'm going to get David's answer, but if it's something you liked, how do you keep and replicate that process as an adult? And if it's coming in, if they're coming into something that it is they don't like, how do you change their mind without them leaving, right? How do you change their mind in real time, which is really interesting stuff. David, if you wanted to go into kind of what you feel isn't working, whether in the adults you see or in general.
Both. We can look both at the surface and we can look at the underlying presumptions, which could take forever, so I'll try not to do all of them. On the surface, most of the people who are teaching are naturals. And both from the student, the adult student, or the child, more so for the adult student, looking at the teacher, that sets up an expectation and a presumption. I have friends who are teachers. I have family who have been PE teachers. I have family who was PE teachers, and managing teachers. It's really hard to break out of that life experience for a lot of teachers of, okay, I know how to do this technically, but it's not something where I spend a lot of time falling over myself. It's like me teaching yoga. I've been doing it so long, I can just drop into positions, but I've also been teaching long enough that I know my students can't. Mm-hmm. And certainly as PE was awful as a kid, just horrible. There were a couple of good teachers. Going back to what was the positive thing? Yeah, I did learn some things that have stayed with me. Technical things though, form, technical things, not psychological things. So this former college athlete teaching high schoolers, or we look at yoga, which the rude term of art we use in yoga for the bad side of it is the yoga industrial complex. And we look at people, I have an ex and he's gorgeous and a natural at this, and he's a good yoga teacher. But we look at people who do these moves at this point fluently, look good in spandex. And so we have this adult physical education industry in the US, whether it be yoga or whether it be a gym. I have friends who are personal trainers. And there's a psychology of people who are teaching it who are good at it, and not necessarily good at it because it was an immensely difficult technical skill for them to acquire. They're naturals. Mm-hmm. And most people aren't. One underlying psychological point, and I'll leave the rest alone. We have a presumption of health that is false. Most people, most of the time, everywhere in the world and the history of the world are not healthy. Some of us are lucky, and we've had periods in our lives, for those of us, you know, with some affluence, usually some point from the middle of our childhood, for decades even, where nothing really bad happens. No chronic disease happens, no reoccurring pain happens. It's the same psychology problem with the natural at sports or some other physical education. That's not the experience of most people. Dealing with kids, except when I'm working with disabled kids, I don't run into it that much. Dealing with adults, I do run into it all the time. Everybody's got, past a certain age, a certain experience of some sort of chronic health problem, as well as the occasional acute problem. And that's normal. Mm-hmm. And the way we think about these things is to hold that up aside as the abnormal. And that's wrong. And our entire psychology about health, wellness, how we teach people how to move, how we teach people to feel good in the skin and take care of themselves and repair themselves and get out of bed with less pain, starts from a false, for most people, starts from a false presumption of default wellness. And that's something worth really thinking in and getting at, because it applies as much to adult education as it does to teaching middle schoolers, so much more to adults.
Right. I think this idea of perceived ableism on both fronts, teacher front looking at students, student looking at themselves, this idea, you're fast and coordinated and you're not. And that's it. Like, those are the genes you got sent, and I'm just going to be left behind and not be good at this because I wasn't given the right cards. And instead, again, just like you said, of looking at it in that way, like, these guys get it. These are my applaud ones. I'm going to work with them. It should be flipped. These guys get it. Just give them the ball. Just let them go. These are the ones that need their minds changed, that need the steps, that need the building points, that need the confidence and the self-efficacy, all the things you were talking about. Those are the ones that we kind of need to build up, right? So if we have this great equalizer that showed up, which should be us, right? And if I put a bunch of the good kids with a bunch of the not so good kids, I'm going to handicap and constrain the good kids so they have to get better on their own way, right? Okay, you have no left hand, you got to play this basketball, you can only use your left hand, right? Now he's like, oh, okay, but the competition that he's with, again, is in that right level of challenge, and yet the kids that are playing against them are they're not facing a well-honed opponent. So it is this kind of manipulation, and taking that next turn. And again, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying which is a trend that I've seen elsewhere, this idea that physical education is becoming simply physical activity. So in this idea, and I think we all kind of look and frame recess as, this is really it, but our job is to bottle it. Our job is to, divulge that out. This kid no one's playing with this kid. This kid's all by themselves, right? So talking to another student's like, hey, you notice Jeffrey over there? Like, you want to just go see if he's interested in playing with you, right? Like, that's simple. And you see these kids, and even at high school, they're not monsters, right? You see these kids, and you pick the right one. It's typically a girl, and they see that and they know what it feels like, and they go over and they do it themselves, right? You don't necessarily kind of have to step in to fix everything. You allow them to fix their situation on their own. So Michael, what do you think when there's pushback or labeling PE as recess, as physical activity? Any issue there? Is that like?
Yeah, I think that, so in my experience with being a strength and conditioning coach at the high school level, I was explicitly told by the athletes that PE was not where the cool kids went, and that they literally were only signing up for the sport that I was coaching them on so they could hang out with their friends. They didn't even care about playing the sport that they signed up for. They just didn't want to be the kid who was in PE, and they wanted to be able to control the fact that if all of their friends signed up for the same sport, that they would have this period together. So that mindset in and of itself is now perpetuating the idea that PE is for losers, right? That for like unathletic kids who just don't, or it's not even unathletic, because the kids who are signing up for the sports were relatively unathletic if we were to like try to judge them in such a way, right? But the whole mindset of that was completely skewed to me, in that, okay, I understand now, this is not cool for you being in this class. So therefore, like, if that's not gonna like lift you up in the social hierarchy of the high school, I'm the popular person, look at me, then why would you ever want to go to that class, right? So with that being the foundation, I'm thinking, how do we make PE cool again? Right? How can we make this a cool class that kids actually want to sign up for? And I don't know, like, that is a complete shift in mindset, right? That it's a whole cultural, so that was really shocking to me when the kids told me that. And I immediately got it. I was like, well, yeah, I should have thought of this before. But I don't know what to do for that, because no one's looking at PE as the class that they are trying to sign up for, that has the wait list on it that they're hoping that they can get into, right?
Now, is California PE obligated or no?
Yeah.
It is. Okay.
Yes. Well, you can play a sport and that'll count as your PE, right?
Right. Yeah. I've got a whole hold Tyrad on that, but I'll pause. Let me let David speak on that. The idea of physical education, recess, the same, different. What do you think?
A quick response to waitlist. When I was in high school, we had wait lists for parts of PE because at the high school level up, we had PE broken up, not into a general clump. There were specific activities. If you wanted to go scuba diving, which you could do as part of PE, there was a wait list, etc. There were lots of different things. So there is a way to make it interesting. You were talking in glancing about basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember dribbling drills, lots of them. And maybe I can still do it. I haven't tried in a while. I learned how to dribble. What I didn't learn was how to enjoy basketball.
Mm-hmm. The game works for you, right? This notion that the game could be anything you want it to be instead of you working for the game. Yeah. Again, this complete inversion.
And so we have this concept of play, recess. You know, we're talking about running around outside as kids. I did plenty, though I truly sucked at PE and hated it. I was hiking and swimming and surfing and sailing and all sorts of stuff. You know, outdoor kid, very happy about it.
What kind of things were they asking you? Were they just having you play sports? Is that?
I had a PE coach in the middle of high school almost kill me by drowning me once. And I'm, as it was at the time, a Red Cross certified rescue swimmer. And he insisted I do something that I was an extremely capable swimmer. I said, I know I can't do that. And unfortunately, I listened to him rather than listening to me. And unfortunately, I was right, and he had to drag my unconscious ass off the bottom of the pool. Yeah, these things happen. But that's part of a pattern of a model you started out talking about, where we do it always as teachers. The teacher is an authority more than a guide. And yeah, I mean, when I'm looking at, I've not taught kids where I've had them in a play situation. I've always taught kids where I've had the luckiest time teaching kids. Why I did not become a high school math teacher. They've always been either an apprentice standing beside me or a group of, you know, middle school, lower high school kids who really are walking in the door already enthusiastic about what we're going to do. My job in a teacher at that point is just simply break it down into appropriate size parts and pay attention to how well they're receiving it. The whole management side of being a teacher that, you know, I spent classroom time learning how to do, not a problem, not my concern. With adults, it's different. And I don't think we successfully bring play into adult education. I've done it in a nonprofit environment where doing something that isn't framed as something as formal as yoga. When I was a weekly bicycle ride leader or hiking groups, which are very much adult physical education, just change the framing slightly. You get to let people loosen up.
Again, this idea that anything you do with your body in a certain way, which kind of leads into the track of the way that framing, if I take that, the framing of what PE is, at least at the high school level. So if we look at the tiers, the elementary, the middle, and the high school. Elementary, right, is kind of, other than they're really constrained by time and how often they see the kids and probably number of kids. So I think it's typically like 15 to 30 minutes. Elementary is like, hey, let me get them moving, and the kids are in it, like anything at all, right? Parachute, I remember parachute, every time you see a parachute, kids are like, right? The simplest thing. Middle school comes in, and it's almost like that isn't good enough anymore. That isn't going to get you anywhere. So in middle school, all of a sudden, everybody starts understanding and starts learning sports and fitness, really. That now everything goes into 2 tracks. And then at the high school, those are even further delineated, because at where I am at, Michael, all the athletes were told by the coaches, get into strength and conditioning. So it was kind of a mandate. And if they didn't do it, they did some, so if they didn't do weightlifting, then they did team sports. And those are the two tracks. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it and I was successful, right? We talk about your PE experience, and PE, I was picked first. Only time in school that, right? People are like, you, get over here. The teachers like me, I knew how to, I knew how to learn, I knew how to figure things out, right? So coming from that system, growing up to being an athlete and then no longer being an athlete, which is inevitable. Now you got nothing, right? So in that moment, and I was in my late 20s, started to consider, number one, nobody knows how to take care of their bodies. Nobody knows how to take care of their bike, right?
Right.
So that piece had to come in, but what about all this other stuff? You know, look at all this other acrobatics, gymnastics. Why, you know, hand balancing, why did all this stuff go away? Is because the teachers that took up the guard in high school didn't do those things. That's not why they're a PE teacher. They were a successful athlete and they probably coached something. So they're going to use their model to every single kid. No wonder kids get lost, right? So it's this idea, and you know, I've said this before, but this idea that if PE really did its job, there would be no such thing as movement culture. It wouldn't be a thing, because this process of learning and knowing and doing and accessing and utilizing would be built in. The athlete, the high school quarterback, would still know what to do with himself after his space is gone, his coach is gone, his teammates are gone. And it would be on just, I guess I better get stronger for football. They would know the three tenets, right? I have to be able to interact with my environment. I have to be able to learn through my body, and I have to be able to take care of myself. Like, those are the three things. Those are the three things that I feel PE should just swirl around. And it swirls in the direction in which the student population is ready for it, right? If I have a super ultra competitive class, I'm not going to make them slow down and feel, they hate it. I'm going to give them what they want, and then I'm going to, like vegetables, I'm going to just, right? Toss it in, let it marinate, see what happens, right? See it be competitive. This idea of no touching, right? All right, we're going to play basketball, but if you want to foul, go for it, right? Now all of a sudden I have to use a whole bunch of different skills. So again, it's expanding the framework and finding the avenues in which your students in groups go for. I feel like that is the trend that needs to happen, yet it takes a lot of work and a lot of trial and error and a lot of effort and a lot of consistency, because tradition is tradition for a reason, right? We got these two strong probes because this person became a bodybuilder or this person got a college scholarship. 0.01%. What about the rest? Anybody, just take it away.
I often feel doing adult physical education that I'm doing remedial education. And I think in some ways, doing secondary physical education, you're doing preemptive remedial education. We have to think not just of our mostly athlete teachers, but also the culture we very much live in. We have professional sports at the most unbelievable highest level, televised, constantly doing things you never even thought of, and you can look at the record books. Our sports training is getting like it never ever was before. And that trickles down. The idea I speak about is performance. Whether I'm coaching someone on how to actually do well on a bicycle or enjoy doing well on a bicycle, or I'm coaching someone on how not to injure themselves doing yoga. And it's in this concept of performance is in how we do yoga as much as anything else. Faster, harder, deeper, bend more. Oh, good, I can hear a snapping sound. That means you've gotten it right. And you walk into your average yoga studio, which is not what I do, and you see, people in pretty good shape, in really fancy, silly clothing, doing their dangdest to get their nose between their ankles, with their legs straight. And, there's a competitiveness, which is great fun, at a sort of middle school and younger loose sports age, it can be great fun. It can also be vicious, but as we get further on, as we get older, whether it's in high school or as an adult, the competitiveness gets much less playful. And not only does it contribute to injury, it contributes to a lasting injury between the ears of a way of thinking about movement. So you get a lot of people, again, looking often at adults, who set a standard for themselves that not only are they never going to meet, their simple experience of trying is so profoundly dissatisfying or frustrating that they stop, or they bounce against it a few times because, you know, they really want to do this and they have some willpower. Then they stop. The psychology of performance, of must do it this way. I mean, form does matter, otherwise you're going to injure yourself, but degree doesn't. Whether you're in the gym and how much gets bench pressed, or you're on the yoga mat and how far it gets bent, or you're on the bicycle and how far or how fast you go. Those aren't the measurements, the variables that really matter. But we're submerged in a culture that has the highest level imaginable ever human athletic performance televised 24/7. And we also are submerged in marketing. And marketing is telling us to constantly be dissatisfied. And it is constantly telling us to be dissatisfied with ourselves. So in teaching this, I can't really speak to either of those directly when I'm teaching, but I can know they're there.
Right.
And teach the student the small satisfactions. It's remedial education. The question for you is, how do you do preemptive remedial education, knowing this is out there?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on lots of big bricks there, but I know Mike's got to be chomping at the bit with this idea of performance in young people and specialization. So I just want to hand you the mic and just go for it.
I think you really touched on an important point, and it's asking the question, are the teachers even qualified enough to teach a program that encompasses all those different things that would go into exposing kids to these different practices, right? So I'd written down, like, what is my kind of meat and potatoes of my curriculum, right? And to kind of make it less like bigger picture, this is now kind of zooming in a little bit. So I wrote down track and field, right? Running, skipping, jumping, throwing, gymnastics, tumbling, calisthenics would be under that, rough and tumble play, so like pretend fighting, grappling, basically non-sexual human touch, resistance training, so they could walk into a conventional gym and they know how to use the racks, they understand the barbells, they can do that whole thing too, right? So if they want to go down that route, they can. Parkour, so moving through your environment, climbing, jumping, getting up and over things, that kind of idea, kind of seeing the outdoors in a different way, right? You walk up to a bank and you're like, well, I can vault over this wall to get into the bank now, right? Dancing, so understanding rhythm, dynamics through self-expression, and more internal parasympathetic practices like meditation, qigong, yoga, maybe hiking in nature, breathing, understanding how that can affect you. So relaxation techniques, essentially. Water, swimming, treading, drown proofing, diving, and then all of this packaged in gameplay that requires decision-making, teamwork, and self-discovery. And basically the teacher is a guide who can teach these motor skills, right? You could break it down to the kids who maybe aren't just going to be the ones who are jumping up and over the thing or know how to swim. And then also basically just asking them a ton of questions without there being any right or wrong answer. And just basically the question serving as a way for them to think about themselves and what it is they're doing and how that might affect them. So that's kind of like, who is going to be able to teach all that, right? Like, because I've spent time trying to learn all these things. And let me tell you, it's more than a part-time job to be competent in them enough to teach them to people who don't know how to do them or have never experienced them before, right? So if we're looking now at that, it's like, how are we going to get teachers up to that level? Because like you said, maybe they're just a collegiate athlete So that means they basically specialize probably since high school. So how much are they getting exposed to all these different practices? Probably not much. And I don't think it's feasible for the school to be bringing in 8 different specialists, right? To be, facilitating all these different parts of a curriculum that's going to give kids the bigger picture and say, hey, you're more interested in parkour? Okay, well, let's take you down that road if you really want to do that more. We can help you out with that. Are you really like swimming? Okay, well, maybe then we plug you into the swimming and dive team or water polo or something. But at least you kind of got this basic alphabet of a lot of these different practices and kind of could see where you fit in. And then even zooming out further, understanding that these, again, are just practices that you can specialize in. And really, it's going to come down to find things you like, be able to mix and match and play around and have a good time with it. And yeah, I mean, to bring a teacher up to know all those things and be able, like, teaching motor skills is not easy. You have to spend time breaking down if you really want to teach someone who's like not very like, okay, I'm just going to do it. Just give me the constraints that I need to abide by and I'll just run through this wall for you, right? It's not that easy. And you got to make sure that you're taking care of all types of things, whether it be someone overcoming fear, overcoming whatever limitations they might have physically, mentally, in the group setting as well, not wanting to fail in front of their peers. Like, how do you create this environment that lends itself to someone really kind of seeing what they're capable of and then playing around, having a good time? Doesn't have to be for an outcome, right? This is very difficult, and I wish I had the answers. I think I'm just coming up with more of what the problems are rather than the answers, and I don't like to be that guy. But it's more of like, for you, instance, like, you're just like, look, I got my thing. I'm going to take care of my kids, and like, we're going to do it here in my little community. And that's how it starts, right? But then how do we start extending that further and further out and expand the radius to the PE teacher in the next town over, the next state, right?
Yeah, and if I take my own experience on that piece, now what? I personally couldn't make that a motivation. First I got to take care of my kids, right? So as long as it is in this container that we create and we shape, I feel like I can do anything, right? But if you consider what it really is, it's human behavior. It's communication skills. It is the allowing the students to lead you. I think that skill set, perhaps in a generalized way, is something that could be translated. And it is so personal. I remember, Dave, I think you said pre-remediation. You thought of
preemptive remedial education.
Okay. So even if we take that aspect as a high school PE teacher, where kids have to take PE to graduate, and again, they get to choose. So I need to like make sure that the kids get to choose me, which is called games and practice. They get to choose weight training, or they get to choose team sports. So they got the kids that are into what has worked in middle school, or just wants to be a fitness person, they're covered. But all the others who didn't really dig the rest or want to try something new, they come to me. So I have this population, and I also have options for them. Because if I had, for example, if I have a class that is a bunch of kids who love team sports, for example, last year we had a long-term sub that was just like, it was basically like a sign-up table, and it was just like, take your stuff and go. And there really wasn't a class, there was no speaking. So I had a lot of kids being like, at least they're doing stuff next door. So they all came in. And so that class really became a team sports class, but with focuses and with constraints, right? So again, using it as they use it. But I am their last chance, is how I see it. I am their last chance in a free basis for them to figure out what it is they like, how to think about and connect things, how to get better, and how to be sensitive. Why do you like this game? I don't know. Oh, break it. Why? Because if you know why you like it, then you can apply it to what are the pieces? So keep unraveling. The same thing in basketball unit, right? Every kid gets a ball. I just say, take a ball and go. Every single kid is going to dribble that basketball. Even if they hate that, they're going to dribble it because they like bouncing. Some know sports, so they're going to get a game going on, right? So and then we get into homogeneous versus heterogeneous. Kids doing the same thing the same way is only good for the teacher. It's only good for that management. That's how they keep everything intact. But there needs to be a little bit of chaos and ownership. That's the energy, that's the excitement, right? So the kids who are down with basketball, go play, pick teams, you got it, you need pennies, cool. You want a good ball, here's the best ball you can have to play your game, right? And I'll take the other kids who don't care what kind of ball they have, and we're gonna do proprioception, dribbling stuff, rhythmic stuff, right? Take it away, do whatever you can to take it away. You got 30 seconds, right? All this stuff. Again, the attention and the focus is put on the lower ability, the lower confident, to build them up. So again, every kid walks out at least at a baseline of knowing what they can do, what their weaknesses are, and how, in some way, to build them up. How do I get better? That's the game, right? So
you are the last best hope, which is why it's a coinage of the moment, but it's why I say, you know, preemptive remedial education. In decades of watching, reading, decades of the ongoing education crisis, because Lord knows it's been talked about my entire life, and certainly since I was once an ed major and friends who are teachers and all that. One of the current cliches is to make lifelong learners. And it would be nice if we began to know how to help people be lifelong physical learners. We have, not perfect, but amazing sports med at this point. I know a lot about what goes on at I did know a lot about what goes on at the University of Colorado when I lived there. And we have really in the last few decades, massively improved our ability to train professional and competitive, Olympic athletes and stuff. And we know a fair bit about the psychology of competitive athletes. I can tell you an awful lot about what happens to a person on a bicycle. Unfortunately, gross anatomy and neuroanatomy for yoga is still caca, but it is what it is. There are some studies published, lots of good stuff published about social reinforcement. We don't really know a whole lot about the non-competitive athlete, the non-athlete, what happens between that person's ears, let alone, their muscles and tendons, about how they get off the couch and do it. And the reason I've done the nonprofits, particularly the one in Portland, is we have a national health crisis that's becoming a global health crisis. We have just huge, appalling numbers of preventable metabolic diseases. Not just overweight, but obese and morbidly obese, and diabetes type 2, and heart disease. And you're at one end of that life history, and I'm somewhere towards the other end of that life history. And so the question I want to ask a PE is, our technical ability is amazing. And I would like to think that if I went and got gymnastics training now, presumably we could, take decades off of me so that I could not do it with quite as much pain, that I would have gotten to get much better training now than I got, when I was a teenager. Just because our technical understanding and our technical ability to teach these disciplines has become so much better. But obviously there's a failure, a very big failure, because we have 30% of the people in this country are not fat, obese. Mm-hmm. Something's broken.
Yeah, and I think that certainly feeds into what Mike was talking about regarding, like, a gymnastics guy is going to open up a gymnastics center and you're going to pay him money to teach you gymnastics, right? But in a public education setting where gymnastics is one of 20 plus options, and you've got all bunch of kids in the different interests of kids in the same class, right? And they have to come to you. It is required to come to you. Right? How do you deal with when there's no opt-out? How do you deal with those? And you talk about human engagement and behavior, like that's where it really comes into play, when you realize it really has nothing to do with what you're trying to teach, and this kid really wanting you to get to know them.
And do you have the time?
And this is how that works, right? The default is get out of here. You're being disrespectful. These kids are good and you're bad. But what I've come to learn is that once you, right, give them a second and be like, hey, come talk to me a second. Let me get these guys set up. We set the kids up, do their thing. And then we're just simply going to have a conversation. And in that conversation, they could have some of those social anxieties. They could have some of those issues. A lot of times they just want the trust of their own space to do what they need. I don't know how many kids are having like an emotional breakdown day or mental health day. And I can see, and they're coming and they're being compliant, they're dressing down, but they're in tears in the checkout line, in the attendance line. And it's just like, I'm not going to ignore that. And I think part of it is seeing if you will ignore it. Will they treat me like all the rest? Or are they going to notice and pay attention and help me give myself what I need? I don't know how many times I would send the kids off to play something, have a conversation one-on-one or small group. I mean, like, what do you think you need right now? They always know. I need some space to get my head right. Do you need a notebook to write? Like, no, okay, you want the lights off? Do you need a mat? Yeah, so I will give them either I'll put them in my office with the lights off with a mat. I'll put them in like the mat room that is segregated away from everybody else. And I'll give them that time and space to get themselves together. I maybe will check up on them once because I have to go back to the other kids. But you want to talk about liking and compliance, that little interaction, you got them for life. And when those new kids come in that don't know how to ask for what they need except with attitude, etc., that kid's going to step in right away. And that's what's going to be talked about behind your back. Like, no, she's cool, man. Just talk to her. Just talk to her. So all of a sudden, you, like, in between classes, you're like the psychologist, like taking it's this never ending, it's so interesting with distance learning. And I think about the energy output that I personally give for 6 periods in a row with a half-hour total lunch and kids wanting to talk with you. And at the end of that day, how absolutely depleted and wrecked I am. Just everything is spent. And it's like, I'll give you this time. And then going to distance learning and not necessarily having that. So now that I have more energy, I can do more with that energy, like put like these TM calls and stuff where I was just like, there's no way I can do more. Right? So, and again, at that microcosm, the same thing, like, what can you do with what you have? Like, that's really the big piece. So it's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but it is to honor the individual within the group in whatever way you can, and to do extra for those that are maybe on a different level than everybody else, who need other stuff. Give them more time and attention. Be wary if they're becoming like a succubus and they're just like, oh, all the time. But, right, for the most part, again, it's just a conversation. For the most part, that will kind of mediate things out. And again, the kid will learn to say, I know what I need. Can I have it? And the answer is going to be absolutely. And then it doesn't become a conversation. I'm teaching the other kids, key's gone, key comes back. I don't miss a beat. They know what they're doing. They come back. And the other thing is that we talk about what happened when they were by themselves. So it isn't, again, I think of the child who really wants to do well and really wants attention. They don't want to be sent away and ignored. They want the trust element, but then they also, at least I feel, they want to know that you care about what happened. Right? Again, we're dealing with little tiny emotional people. And I think more than anything, PE is that kind of place, because again, there's this locker room, etc. And it's social, it's so social. I being not a very social person, I am floored by kids just wanting to be with other kids. Like you said, Michael, like that's enough. That's enough to sign up. That's enough to run the mile. Will you do it with me? Or when a kid doesn't want to do what you have planned for the day. And then you simply, okay, well, what would you like to do instead? And then they're like, oh, like I could do it, but now I have to come up with it. And then if their friend is standing with them, likely they'll look at their friend and be like, what do you want to do? The friend will be like, I don't know, right? So they need to do it with a person. So in that moment, again, my judgment call is based, do I give them an option to go walk? Do I give them an option? Do I have them sit in this little social, what do I do? And will I let that, ultimately, that what do I do, the effort of coming up with that makes them fall back in line and become part of the group. You know, so again, it's constantly this little teasing, it's decision-making based on the moment for me and them, and ultimately just tossing them the keys again and again and again and again. And if you realize they know how to drive, okay, let's break this down. You guys can go. And so every group is its own parts and pieces that you need to look at. And that's doing that and being with them in PE instead of giving balls out and doing roll or making your football program, whatever it is, while the kids are having class. Being with them is my job, right? Like, and there's a big difference between, you know, what people think rolling the balls. I always love the people who are like, you guys just roll the balls out. I love when they have to sub for PE, and they're just like, everything has changed what they have the experience of, but yeah, but being with them is why I'm so drained and willingly drained, because it's an excitement until it's disconnect. And then it's just me in my office, just being like, whew. So I know it takes energy and effort is the whole, and the desire and the will. And I mean, I'm naive enough to think I could change things. So I'm just going to keep trying until, you know, I either run out of energy to do so, or I run out of ideas. But so far, the output, it's like this well of mindfulness and emotion and excitement. They feed me, and I make sure that they know that. I make sure that I can't do what I do unless they show up. Mm-hmm. This idea of the teacher at the pedestal and the students down here, you can't teach without those kids, right? So remember where the power structure really lies. That was a lot. I'm just going to pause now.
No, that was great, Chris. I mean, what I'm hearing is that it's a student-centered, adaptable approach, right? And it really comes down to being able to connect with people, build that rapport, build that trust, and then kind of let them guide you to what is most useful for them at that point in their lives, right? And that extends to any age, any ability, right? Any person. So yeah, building more, because you were also saying, I mean, you're drained at the end of the day, and I mean, you're basically just burning your life energy, the candle at both ends, essentially, right? For a great cause, right? I couldn't think of a better thing to do it for. But I think a lot of teachers have kind of just become complacent. They've phoned it in, right? They don't want to give that time and effort anymore, or maybe they've got to go home to a wife and kids or what have you. And
right. Well, they only got practice at 4 o'clock, and that's what they're really jazzed about. So the rest, you know, again, it's attention stimulation waves. Like, everyone has to deal with things their own way, but yeah, and you know, I've probably very purposefully set my life that it is just me, right? So I could really go at things.
If you want to explore it, where do you think we go with distant learning? We're looking at two things. Recently, there are reports out of Yakima, and I know there's also some in your part of Oregon and also places like Salinas, California, where we have a lot of students who are working in a second language. And right now, students working in a second language, which is a large population in Yakima, are having a very hard time. And the other population with my own disabilities, and I've also worked with a lot of people with disabilities. So we have at least a couple of populations of students that even if we throw money getting over the technology barrier, I mean, we can just, you know, get laptops and broadband for people. There's still going to be accessibility challenges and language challenges that are very, very, very hard to address in distance learning. And then add on to that, doing physical education in distance learning is really hard.
Yeah, and it's having done that the last quarter of the school year, absolutely. I mean, I have English language learners in each class. And so everything that I put out as a lesson is translated into Spanish. Now, I wish we had the resources at the school in which I would give this to a person and say, hey, person, could you translate the meaning of this, knowing you're a person and knowing the context for this student? But what ended up happening is we had to use Google Translate because there was too much turnover. And no offense, but PE doesn't get the attention. Mm-hmm. PE doesn't get the resources. If this kid's got math or English, they're getting it translated. Like you're at the bottom of the pile. So again, it's how do you help yourself? The way that I basically looked at distance learning, and it looks like at least we're going to a hybrid model, so it seems, we'll see what actually happens, so that distance learning would be continued, is that snippet of offering some sort of task or option, small enough that they could do it if they get home at night at 8 o'clock, right? Something small, and then ask them questions about it. What's your reflection? I'm not the type that will like give someone a workout. Again, if you're working in the fields all day, the last thing that you need to do is get another workout in, particularly because that workout pays no attention to the demands that that field work puts on you, right? So, I mean, if that was the cause, if that was the route I was going, what I would give them is things to undo the field work patterns, right? To give them ease, to make them understand. But so the key for me, keep it really small, keep the movement small, offer them options. And the option is typically, hey, look at this movement. It's typically off like some kind of YouTube clip or your own. You have this or that. So the kids who don't want to come up with stuff, let me just do it. I'll just do this. The kids who are into something else, they get to do the same. So it's a process-based kind of daily to weekly, depending on how complex the topic is, that I will give them, and then they'll give it back to me, basically through Google Classroom. But I mean, I'm sure in Yakima, we have given every student a computer, but we cannot control internet service. And the internet doesn't make money. Comcast doesn't make money going through Woodburn because it's rural. So there is a gap in internet service from the main. So now they have this thing called Wave, and Wave is a small company, right? So again, even though they're given the technology, maybe they can't, and the other thing is maybe they can't afford internet anymore, right? So there's all these pieces. And so what my district did, and you want to talk about angels, my district printed off for all the kids who had some issue. I might have internet, I might not be able to get online, etc. They printed off every single thing from teachers, put it in an envelope, mailed it to their home with a self-addressed stamped envelope for them to bring it back. And they back and forth that thing. Now, to be fair, we didn't get that many back, right? To give you the full picture. And which means that there was a loophole, a failure of some sort, either for us to really, how many houses can the administration go to? But for them to think it was worthwhile. But again, in a crisis, in a pandemic,
you try everything you can.
Yeah, you got to take care of yourself. Right? I don't know what your house is like. I don't know how many people are in your house. We have quite a few. I would say about 15% are designated homeless. So what address are you going to send it to? Right? So there's tons and tons, and there's only so much support people that can go out. So you do the best you can do with what you have that tries. And it's interesting. A lot of people said, we did all this work for all these kids to make sure they would get the stuff, and we didn't get anything back, as if it was the kids' fault, right? And it's just like, wait a minute, like, take a step back. Like, their living and survival as any being on the planet is more important than your lesson. Like, that needs to be understood first and foremost, and to give quite a bit of grace. So these lessons you've been preparing for 2.5 months, okay, let them show it to you in one thing, condense it, right? And that's, again, it's requiring more and different and more and different. And we have PE teachers at the high school are freaked out, and it's like, let's get on a Zoom call. And I'm like, we're on summer, we're on break, but they don't know how to adjust to, they can't dress down. Like, like we have to have a certain amount of feet. All they know is what they know, and they don't know how to adjust and adapt it. They think PE are these two things. How am I going to play basketball with all these constraints? why are you doing basketball? And why are you doing basketball that way? Right? So it's, again, it flips everything on its head, and it really shows who are the open thinkers, who still greatly value what they do. They value it so much that they're going to develop a different system in which to implement it. And then you have the traditionalists who are going to, right, when a safety issue comes in place, and they're going to argue the kids have to dress down in my class. The kids are not going to wear masks. And like this is the things that teachers come up with, this regimented, I will not, because they're tethered to what they've done, the idea of what they're doing, instead of, again, taking that step back and being like, what's really important here?
Well, in some ways, the isolation of lockdown and the need to do distance learning brings those questions up. Yeah. Michael, are you doing distance teaching?
A little bit, yeah. But I see the things that Chris, you were talking about with them not even having a home address, right? That's not really a problem where I'm at in Orange County, California, right? So that is a completely like a whole nother issue right there in and of itself. But when the distance learning that I have done has been, I'm not a huge fan of social media, but I'm trying to accept what the world is into today. So I've been trying to leverage social media in such a way that it gets the kids engaged. So they make their own little accounts, and then we're asking them to post vlogs about their food or post blogs about any physical activity that they're doing. And then all the people in the class are following each other's accounts. Yeah. And it's really been the best way I've seen to get, because they're already on social media. They're going on it all the time, at least the kids that I'm working with. So it's like, well, if they're already on, maybe this is easy enough to get their buy-in. And then everyone kind of likes to see themselves on the screen and talk about what they're doing, right? So I'm trying to think, what can we do that they're already doing and make it sort of a little bit more? So I've been asking them to give me 3 days of full-on meals that you're eating. And you got to like make a little video of what it is, how much it is, where you're at, what you're doing, who you're with. And they become little vloggers. And I don't know if I want to create more vloggers, but it's the only way that I've noticed that I can get them aware of what they're eating.
And you're having them post it publicly.
Yeah.
So basically you're using group social reinforcement and putting it into social media. Nice hack.
Yeah.
Very nice hack.
And you think too, kids are being seen, which they like, they're getting attention, what they like, and they're gaining followers. All the thing that elevates their social clout, they just happen to be doing. You just, again, you're the guiding post that just post about this. Okay, I'm gonna make the best dang post about that you've ever seen, right?
That's a very nice hack. I know you've worked with kids with disabilities. You doing any of that lately, or any thoughts on how that works with distance learning?
Are you talking to me or Michael?
Yeah, I don't know about Michael. I know, Chris, that I think at some point you did do some work with kids with disabilities.
Yeah, so I basically, for myself, and I think, Michael, you're also in the same boat?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay.
No, I haven't worked with kids with disabilities.
Okay, so again, I take my week lesson and I synthesize it down to the main question. And I literally have that main question or that main thing be the thing that gets sent home for the week. So again, if I'm looking at this, what is the smallest element that they can engage with that can be done to show me that could in some way demonstrate some sort of understanding. And you have to think too, in that instance, it's very difficult because the kids can't write very well, right? They're at home with parents who may or may not be engaging with them. So again, the work I get back is kind of rough to understand, but the fact that something is coming back makes me think that there was at least some interplay.
Some engagement, some attempt.
Yeah, but that's how it, so we have, there is a special ed like teacher coordinator, and basically all of our kids were in one class of mine. So I would send her, this is what they're looking at for the week. And she, on her time when she's working with them, could be able to kind of field questions or answer things. But I try to make it so simple, not too simple that like, why are we, but again, the appropriate level of challenge that they can get into it and have some kind of an answer to think about what they're doing, what is happening as they're doing this. So that's the realm that I use right now. One more intermediate to kind of be helpful. So
No, they're tough problems.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I think this is a boon. I think this is for figuring out a different way. Like, I've been trying to get kids to think about what they're doing for, 8 years now. And now that they don't have the game and the space and the thing, right? Here's this opportunity, like, here it is. And they're forced to do it because the thing they really want to do can't happen right now. Right? The games and the friends and the gym and all this, and then put the music on. Well, we got to pay attention to what we're doing. Like, so I'm trying, I am an opportunist, and I will try to use shifting conditions to make me better and help me better understand and offer different things. I think if you're too stuck on what you think is right without looking at what's in front of you, things just become more difficult.
I think this could be a boon in a few lucky places. Unfortunately, I think in a lot of the country, it's just going to be more television.
Yeah, more screen time. Yeah.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. I have been going over to my cousin's house. That's about an hour away. And they have 3 kids, 3 children, 7, 11, 13. And then they have another cousin who comes over who's 7 as well. So we have 4 kids usually at the same house. And the parents have to work most days. So the kids are at home all day and basically just on their little iPads. And I go over there and I try to elicit some type of physical activity or take them to the beach or do something, get them outside in the backyard. And they're very, very resistant because all they want to do is play Fortnite or video games, right? And if you get in the way of them and their little Fortnite addiction, you are now the bad guy and you are no longer their friend. And the parents come home after a full day of work, right? Left the house like 5, 6 a.m., not getting home till maybe 4 or 5. And they just make dinner, put it on the table, and then they have to just basically go just reset, right? Because they're exhausted. So there's absolutely no, and the kids are just, again, on the tablet because everyone's just kind of zoning out in that way. So, I mean, I'm like, this is terrible, right? What is this going to do?
Absolutely. And, but at the same time, I go to the grocery store and there's a mom with 3 kids and I'm just looking at her like, how on earth are you surviving? So I as a witness, I cannot judge them for that. I don't mean the word judgment, but the observation. People are going to, again, do what they need to do to survive. If you get home, if the only way you can get some peace is to, put something on, a show on, go for it. The question would be, can you in some way integrate, again, this takes the effort, if you're willing to, can you integrate what it is they love, which is this device, with the stuff they need? And that's the whole idea of PE, right? What is it that you like? What is it that you need? And how do we marry them in some way that is enjoyable for you? That isn't necessarily a punishment.
Or a different question. Teachers recognizing the environment that you're teaching into, which is now, for not the distance learning was invented yesterday, but now for most teachers, a novel problem. You're no longer teaching into a classroom which has a certain amount of attention set up into it by the cultural framing and the physical structure and a certain amount of discipline and all sorts of stuff. This is not going to turn out to be some experiment in Summerhill or some other utopia of self-directed, self-time managed learning. No, unfortunately, exactly, it is going to be kids playing some video game on an iPad. Recognizing teaching into this relatively, I used to do this for universities with satellite dishes a long time ago and far, far away. Recognizing teaching into this new environment, is there a different way to choose what is taught and to structure? I mean, you're talking about cutting things down into bite-sized pieces, which is good, but is there more to be done than that? Thinking about how to shape lessons, how to structure lessons, how to shape expectations. What are we asking back from learners in this unstructured, massively distracting, often highly stressful I mean, even if the kids know if they're a certain age that they're unlikely to get sick, even if they get infected, it's still massively stressful to be in.
I think all those variables you hit upon are all the variables that you constantly tinker with, right? I mean, I wouldn't be like, I closed, I'm like, that was a really good lesson, like, you know, and then you send it out there and you're like, oh, like, all right, 50% return.
Great on paper.
Yeah, so it is that kind of thing. Maybe instead of typing, it's a video, right? Again, how do we get an engagement? It was like we had to do these office hours things where like we were available. 0 kids came to my office hours except 2 that really wanted to be social. Like, we just want to talk with you about our life. And I was like, okay. So that was what our, you know, so again, we keep using school mentality to reach someone who's sitting at home that is a choice, right? No one's looking at them. So how we create that engagement, whether it is the media that they're working with or not, that is, I feel like that's the constant juggle, that's the constant tinkering, and that it never is fully in stone. For as much as I have built on, I will never, ever repeat a lesson, because one extra kid or one less kid changes the entire dynamic. So I take ideas that seem to have a bearing and seem to, you know, be some kind of a hit, and I manipulate them, and I try to offer them, cut them up into parts or lump them together and offer it in a multitude of ways so I can get to know what type of learner they are, how they are motivated.
Well, the idea of doing it was something like a Facebook group or a Twitter feed, which, among other things, in terms of fitting the technology being different from the classroom environment, is asynchronous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're used to a synchronous, like a video conference. We're used to a synchronous engagement, although in the classroom we might break up people into groups. Whereas the technology that's used in social media, not video chat, but the technology used in social media can be immediate and immediately responsive, but often isn't and doesn't have to be. I just don't know how many teachers we have who know how to use that as a teaching medium.
Yeah, and I think
the new thing.
A really good point. At the last like Care Lab, there was a guy who talked about tech, and he mentioned this platform I never even heard of, called Twitch, where basically, right, it's a gamer, so all the gamers are there, and they're like, there's no movement people in there, we should go infiltrate and see what happened, right? So the fact that your office hours could be you doing something on Twitch and interacting, again, you can only do whoever shows up. The asynchronicity, an interesting point that you might have value in, is I have done in the past, I have given, 2 to 3 to 4 random things for the week. And I would say, do these and whatever, or you could do them all on the same day. You could break them up, you can do it. And then what is your summation? How are they linked? They tell me what they're linked to, what was difficult, why they chose what at a certain point. So that is them reflecting. Again, it has nothing to do with what I am doing and everything to do with what are you choosing to do, and are you paying attention to the hows and the whys. And again, that's when you talk about the lifelong learner, that being able to question yourself and look at yourself and study yourself is huge. But we're all, like you said, commercialism, external, like we're all looking out here and nobody's really looking in here. It's like, how many embodied conferences are there right now? About 15 different embodied conferences. So it's like, maybe we should get kids to recognize how they feel, how this thing on its own, without even a ball, is amazing, right? And again, easier said than done. But again, to let them recognize that this instrument on its own is amazing, and that things you can adjust and adapt things anyway. That has to be a piece, unless we're going to grow up with insensitive, everyone's looking for enlightenment adults because they didn't find it in football in the 13th grade.
Well, one of the things that happens in our culture and happens very much with our use of media, and is of course getting worse with our use of media, is we get a huge level of dissociation. which is how we get the adults on the couches that we have as adults on the couches. I mean, the question right now is some version of what Michael's doing of how do we use the tools we have available? In this case, social media being one of them, to engage with the people who very much need to be engaged with, and use this thin, narrow straw that we have available to ask different questions about movement and awareness.
And to make it entertaining, because the most education that's entertaining, right, they're going to want to, but if it's dull and dry and like a textbook, right, not interested. So you have to make it, and that entertainment has to do with them liking and, again, going to where they are.
Michael, how have the kids responded to the use of Facebook for this?
We used Instagram.
Instagram, okay.
And it worked really well. We did a few different experiences, and we actually did before and after PANIS interviews, which is the positive and negative affect scales, right? Mm-hmm. And we did things like a 3 good things intervention. So every day for 7 days, they had to post 3 good things that happened to them that day, and it had to correspond with the media, either a photo or a video of them kind of doing that thing or something that represented that thing. And it was in the, like, everyone followed each other, and then they started having friends who were following from the school because they'd be taping in class or whatnot. And it went really well. Pretty much across the board, the positivity was infectious because everyone was posting about good things that were happening to them, right? Same thing with the food. I wasn't telling them to eat this or that or whatever. Just post your food. Tell me what it is. Cool. And then after that, follow up with a few questions. You know, how did you feel? How do you feel like it affects you? Blah, blah, blah. And basically there was maybe a handful of kids who just didn't want to do it, or their parents wouldn't allow them to be on social media. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it was pretty much across the board. Everyone was giving it a 2 thumbs up of we enjoy doing things like this.
Well, I imagine your district has very high social media penetration.
Well, the idea, as Chris was saying before, I'm trying to think, what are they already doing? If I can make it so they don't even have to go out of their way, they're already on the app. So now, like, Instagram isn't really cool anymore that much. So it's like, yeah, it's TikTok now. So I'm thinking for physical education, like TikTok, they always do these dances that kind of get very popular for a few weeks, and everyone kind of posts them doing it. And like, okay, well, that's kind of a movement thing. And like, let's see how many of you can come up with your own dances, right? And we'll post them on TikTok and see. And I've had a few teachers give me pushback because they're like, this is, you know, stepping over the line of professionalism. You shouldn't be on social media with the kids. And I'm just like, look, like, I'm using whatever I can to reach them. This is now 2020. This is the world we're living in. Like, I think we need to accept this as long as it's nothing inappropriate, right? It should be okay.
So you are going to do more. Next question. Are you going to document what you're doing in a good way, a professional way, I guess, of documenting to share both with your district and with, you know, the rest of the country of teachers? Because, you know, yeah, because those videos, which are usually kids copying some pop star's latest video, are a great way to get, you know, the younger high school and middle school age group engaged, because it's what they're doing anyway. Just structure it.
It's not ideal. It's not what I'd want them to be doing. But again, I have to accept what the reality of today is, right? So yeah, it's definitely something, because it's all out there, right? We have it on social media. If I'm following the kids, I can see everything that's happening. So it is documented in that way. And then kind of following it up with asking the kids questions, getting their feedback about it. So yes, I definitely will put something together here in the future that could highlight this. But again, like I said, there's a lot of people who are not on board with what I'm doing, as it is not like, you are not supposed to be following kids. You know, you are not supposed to be on social media with them. And I get where they're coming from, but I think my heart's in the right place. There's nothing inappropriate going on. And I just think it's the world we're living in now. And I think we need to start accepting that and using it the best way we can to make it useful for what we're trying to do.
It's not like we've never had controversies in education. One of the things, of course, is to have multiple accounts, to have your teacher set of social media accounts that never touch your personal social media accounts. And that unfortunately anybody, I've dealt with it as a nonprofit person, but anybody who's a teacher in the somewhat contentious life we live in should probably have their personal social media accounts quite well locked down if you're actually going to be personal on them, so that your students never find your personal social media accounts.
Oh man, they're crafty. They're real crafty.
And when they do, they get bounced right off.
Oh man, I want to make sure I respect time. I know Michael's got some guests over. Excellent chat as always. Any last statements or questions? I'm excited talking to both of you, and I guess this line of questioning and answering is exactly what needs to happen for things to evolve, right? Not to be behind closed doors, etc. So,
well, for me, the big question always is motivation. And I don't think we're in a situation where that problem has become easier. How do you convey that to a person?
one at a time, right?
And Chris, for you, I have a question. Where are you going, or where do you think we go from here to improve things, or maybe the way that we see the world going, education going, which is again more online? I know we touched on a few things, but I want to hear your side of where this is going and how you're going to be able to facilitate your programs to the best of your ability and still get what you want out of it.
Via distance learning?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it comes into taking those three tenets and offering enough structure and variety in which the three tenets again were, can you learn through your body? Can you take care of yourself? And can you interact with your environment? So these pieces of these are looped around and kind of, it could be tasks that I give them or anything they're already doing, right? Like if they love soccer and they're gonna go ahead and kick out soccer goals, I'm gonna, ask them these questions or questions pertaining to those tenets in that context. I don't have to give the context. They already are living in a context. So all I'm doing is I'm trying to create the red line between what they're doing and what they enjoy doing, and these three principles that I really feel is what will make someone like inhabiting their body for the rest of their life.
And is that communication happening via email? Or are you going back and forth with them through there?
Typically it's through Google Classroom. So we get all the kids' emails. We are able to post lessons and discussions. Most of the time I do it via forms because it's just a quick, and the beauty of that is that when I leave like an open answer, I'll get kids that like have 3-word sentences, and I'll get kids who write me paragraphs. So again, the ability for them to convey, and I will probably add, shoot a video, send a video, in that form of like, I've had students come to me and be privately and be like, how do I jump higher? How I want to dunk, right? So I'll send them resources. So I do think I want to try to get a little bit more interactive in, if it were to continue throughout, where there is video analysis happening, and because it isn't going to happen for a lot of kids. A lot of kids are not going to want that depth, but I do, again, who shows up, I do want to be able to provide coaching and suggestions to those who do want that. Like if we were in class, I would be able to work on this with you. So kind of tethering out that more individual progress, individual interest is going to be kind of a priority as I swirl the greater concepts in class. Basically, how do I do what I do in class online? Which is separate, group them together, give them space, let them go, where they can't really necessarily be playing with each other, but maybe they could be interacting with each other, which is an interesting tenet. It's kind of like the interactive games, right? Grouping people into things and seeing what, like, it's all, again, all my universes are a Venn diagram that feed into each other. So yeah, I think I will probably add a social aspect as well, because I utilize the isolation to get them thinking individually. But if all they want to do is talk to their friends and be with their friends, virtually or not, how do I incorporate that into assignments, which is kind of your social media idea.
And how are they being evaluated? Like, what would they be graded on?
Right now, it's basically the way that we did it. It was basically, did they do something or not? And I have to be fair, even if they didn't do something, to give them benefit of the doubt that maybe they weren't in a situation where they couldn't do it. So basically what we did last semester, if I'm completely honest about it, if they were passing at the quarter, so basically that second semester, and the quarter is when we ditched out and no longer did in-class teaching. If they were passing, they passed. It was pass-fail. And if they were not passing and they did some of this online stuff, they passed. I didn't have any situations where somebody was passing and then they failed because they didn't do it. So, I mean, this is a whole long-term thing where GPA comes up, and now we have this semester or two that's pass-fail, and all these kids want to get into schools, and like, but that's the counselor to decide, right? If they come back to me and be like, what grade would you give? I have a letter grade, but on their transcript, it just comes off as pass-fail. So they get the credit or they don't get the credit, which I think is fair, considering all that we were dealing with. Now, again, since we're starting out the school year this way, I think things will be a little bit, again, that is something that I personally would probably need to tease out. And again, not to be married to your plans, because if I have this great system and I still get kids who aren't turning in anything, I can't say that they failed, right? Again, because the situation perhaps didn't allow learning to take place in the way that I wanted to take place. But then there would try to be like individual reach outs. How do you get a hold of these kids? Which is a whole different story.
Thank you.
Yeah. So in process, like this whole thing, in process, hopefully towards progress.
Well, it sounds like a lot more opportunity for some individual instruction. But then what's interesting is, as we know, social engagement is really so very good, particularly for physical education, at reinforcing and motivating. Then with distance learning, how do we bring social engagement back in and use that, which is so, we're talking about, kids at that age who in the physical classroom are just happy to be with each other.
Yeah.
And so that's a great motivator in the physical classroom for sports activities. So how do we,
and
in this house and that house, how do we make that happen?
It's even just starting with this piece. How do I get these kids to talk to each other? Right? It doesn't have to be about anything. It's like, hey, get to know your group. That kind of, again, the content doesn't have to be primary. It's the context and the situations in which the learning will occur. That's where the effort needs to go. So setting up that kind of structured or scaffold to allow learning to happen. If that's set, the learning's going to be easy. You could kind of toss out anything and they'll come up with some kind of response. So I think you're right. I think that social element is going to be a big, big piece moving forward, figuring out how to add that element into and what my role is in it. And again, how does one quote unquote grade it? Yeah. Good, guys.
Well,
thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm sure I'll be speaking with both of you soon enough. This will be up actually not soon after this call. So it'll be up on you. I put it up right away. So I'll put it up on the YouTube, and then a week or so I'll put it up on the podcast. So if you want to hear yourself or share it out, it'll be available for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, David.
Be well. I like your social media work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.